As you heard, my name is Andy Bannister. I do indeed lead an organisation called Solas. Solas is the Scottish word, the Gaelic word for light. And so we were originally a ministry that started in Scotland, in the United Kingdom. And we do two things, really. First thing we do is we take the gospel out of the four walls of the churches and into the public square. We do events in universities. We help churches put on events in cafes and coffee shops and art galleries and all kinds of places. Come on in. And the other half of what we do is we love teaching and training and equipping Christians how to share their faith with their friends in more meaningful and winsome ways. But introductions aside, let's dive into our topic. And since we are talking about the digital public square and all things digital, the obvious place to begin is 250 years ago. So in 1746, a French clergyman, Jean-Antoine Nollet, French clergyman, gathered 200 monks, and he had them stand in a line a mile long in a field. And each monk was connected to his neighbour by a length of copper wire. Nollet then connected a battery to the end of the line, instantly causing all 200 monks to go, ah, and jump in shock. Now, why did he do this? Nollet was not some kind of monastic masochist. Rather, he was conducting, pardon the pun, he was conducting an important experiment. He wanted to see how far electricity could be transmitted. Because some scientists back in that period of time in the day, they believed that electricity was the key to building a long-distance communications network. And the work of Nollet and others led directly to the invention of the electric telegraph, arguably one of the most important technologies ever invented, actually, because until the telegraph, information was limited. Information could only travel at the speed of a person or at the speed of a train or a ship or a horse. With the invention of the telegraph, we suddenly entered a world where information could travel at an incredible speed, and the telegraph revolutionized the world. In fact, you could argue the telegraph made the modern world. Somebody has actually suggested that we should be really talking about the Victorian internet, quite frankly, in terms of the way this thing turned the world upside down. And the thing is, in terms of where we're beginning today with evangelism, is that technology, especially communications technology, changes culture. Technology, especially communications technology, changes culture. And just as did the telegraph and the printing press, radio, TV, all those technologies have done before, so the internet and digital technology have and are changing our world and doing so at lightning speed. And we are now, as societies, more connected than ever. The average person in the United Kingdom, and I suspect the same would go for most countries in the West, the average person in the United Kingdom now spends 1/3 of their waking time on their phone, as a staggering statistic. It's unbelievable, actually, of which 3 hours is social networking, which is another staggering statistic. Media is now consumed increasingly digitally. Witness the way that Netflix and Amazon Prime and their ilk have replaced traditional television and traditional cinema. The most expensive TV show of all time is actually not a TV show. Most expensive TV show of all time. Does anyone know, actually, what's the most expensive TV show of all time? Anyone know? No, you're also modest this afternoon. It is, in fact, Rings of Power. That absolute travesty of Tolkien's. Well, sorry, I'm giving my view of that show away. Rings of Power, $58 million per episode. That little thing has cost. And furthermore, showing the way the world has become more digital, reflected by the fact that nobody, well, almost nobody, reads a newspaper these days, do we? We get our news on our phones, on our tablets, on our computer screens. And that's brilliant, although I must say there are some things that you can do with a newspaper that you can't do with a tablet. I was sitting in my hotel room the other day and a wasp flew through the window, and trust me, you cannot swat a wasp with an iPad. It doesn't really work in quite the same way, or at least not as efficiently. And then, joking aside, there is the fact that so many of our biggest ethical questions of the day are related to technology. They're especially related to digital technology. To give you just one example. Look at all the furore that is currently circulating around artificial intelligence, not least technologies like ChatGPT. Who knows, maybe in a few years' time at ELF, there will be no speakers. There will merely be an iPad connected to a speaker and ChatGPT will run everything. Who knows? But these kind of questions are being asked, aren't they, in society? Is ChatGPT going to put people out of work? Is artificial intelligence going to take over the world? Have human beings unwittingly created the Terminator? And so on and so forth. So all of these massive changes mean the public square that we want to share Christ in is now a digital public square, and that has all kinds of implications when it comes to evangelism, not least the question of how do we communicate the gospel in such a world. That's what we're going to be thinking about this afternoon. Start then with the challenges. What are some of the challenges that a digital public square create for us in terms of sharing the gospel and evangelism? So here's the first one that I came up with. Probably no prizes for my spotting this one. There's the issue of busyness, isn't there? What I find fascinating is technology is always advertised as labour-saving. Look back through history. When things like vacuum cleaners and washing machines and all those things were invented, they were always marketed with, this will save you time. And I can remember when email began. I was in the workplace in the early 1990s when email came in and we were all told, this will save so much time. And now 20% of the average worker's time is spent on email. Of that, 98% is responding to memes, but there we are. Yes, the reality is that most of us are surrounded by emails, notifications, bleeps, pings, and everything. So much digital noise that it can be hard to keep up. One of the most helpful writers on technological things that I know, Sherry Turkle. Sherry is a sociologist of technology based at MIT in the States. And her book, Alone Together, Why We Expect More from Technology and Less from Each Other, is fascinating. It's based on hundreds and hundreds of interviews with people and their experience of technology. And some of the accounts are quite moving. Let me read you the story of one interviewee that Sherry spoke to in her research for the book. She says, Diane, 36, is a curator at a large Midwestern museum, and she's struggling to keep up with her technology. She says, I suppose I do my job better, but my job is my whole life. Well, my whole life is my job. As I move from calendar to address book to email to text messages, I feel like a master of the universe. Everything is so efficient. I am a maximizing machine. I'm on my phone until 2 a.m. I don't sleep well, but I still can't keep up with what is sent to me. Now for work, I'm expected to have a Twitter feed and a Facebook presence, and now they've asked me to do a blog on what's happening at the museum. That means me in all of those places. I have a voice condition. I keep losing my voice. It's not from talking too much. All I do all day is type, but it's hit me at my voice. The doctor says it's a nervous thing. Makes me wonder whether part of the challenge of evangelism in the digital world, we have the task of explaining to people what does it mean to help people see how Jesus' message, come to me all who are heavy laden and I will give you rest. What does that look like? What does that mean to people who need rest from all of this digital noise? It's a gospel question right there, I think. Which brings me to my second challenge. If the first is busyness, second will be distraction, right? That life for many of us is so busy. Most of us spend our days saturated with emails, texts, tweets, alerts, comments, links, posts, photos, videos, blogs, searches, downloads, uploads, files, folders, feeds, filters, walls, widgets, clouds, and pop-ups. I did that sentence without taking a breath. Interesting question, of course. What happens, though, when people stop and withdraw from that and start asking questions? Another wonderful book on technology is this one, William Powers, Hamlet's Blackberry. Great title for a book. It's a brilliant book looking at how we can learn from how we cope with new technology in the past and applying that to the present. But in that book, he makes an interesting little comment near the beginning. He says, when you start wondering about your own busyness, pretty soon you're pondering much deeper questions, such as, is this the kind of life I really want? From there, it's just a short hop to the big league existential stumpers. Why are we here? And whom am I? That raises for me the question, what about for us as Christians? Because over the centuries, I think the church has shown a tendency sometimes to fall into opposite errors when it comes to technology. Sometimes we ignore them entirely and we go all Luddite. Other times we go the other way and we embrace them uncritically. But I find myself thinking, shouldn't the Christian worldview offer us an alternative place to stand, to observe and reflect? Yeah, I wonder how often we do. Challenging question. How does your use of digital technology look any different from the world's? If your colleagues and friends looked at how you use technology, would they see a difference? And then how do we communicate into a world where the signal-to-noise ratio is so high? I remember we ran across that question at Solas, actually, when the pandemic hit. Back in 2020, when the world went mad and coronavirus hit, we had an internal discussion as a team about should we start pouring loads of time and energy into creating many more digital resources? Because, of course, everyone was locked up and couldn't engage. And we tried a few things, but we very quickly concluded because everybody was creating loads of digital resources, there was actually no point. And actually, the best thing we did was slow down, do less things, and do them much more effectively. And now, of course, when everyone has a blog, everyone has a podcast, everyone has a social media feed, how do you stand out from the crowd? That is one challenge. Another challenge, disconnection. The problem with all of this digital noise is that our society, I think, is forgetting how to have conversations. We live in a culture that's forgotten how to connect person to person, and that can be a challenge too. Here is Sherry Turkle again in a more recent book, Reclaiming Conversation, The Power of Talk in the Digital Age. Sherry says, we say we turn to our phones when we're bored, and we often find ourselves bored because we have become accustomed to a constant feed of connection, information, and entertainment. There is now a word in the dictionary called phubbing. It means maintaining eye contact whilst texting. My students tell me it's not that hard, they do it all the time. All of this adds up to a flight from conversation, at least from conversation that is open-ended and spontaneous, conversation in which we play with ideas, in which we allow ourselves to be fully present and vulnerable. So given that the gospel is not a set of facts, and that what we want to introduce people to is not a tweet or a meme, not a concept but a person, one challenge, I think, is how we engage with a world that struggles with this idea of connection. But I wonder if there is a place for the church in modelling what good communication looks like and showing something quite different. Fourth challenge of our digital world is, of course, that everyone has their own truth and their own experts. For any of you in this room who are wired apologetically, who love to persuade, I'm of that ilk. Problem is, we love the fact that Christianity is something we can give reasons for, but we're living in a world in which our skeptical friends can do a couple of internet searches and find 3,000 atheists saying something different. And we live in a world that seems to think that an expert means a person with Google on their phone. And so we have this issue where everyone has their own truth, their own experts, and so on. I thought a nice kind of cultural example of that 2 years ago, Prince Harry, one of our minor royals, well actually no longer one of our minor royals, and Meghan Markle popped up on the Oprah Winfrey show, and there was a moment that went viral where Meghan said to Oprah, well, this is my truth. And I thought, lots of Christians screamed back, well, hang on a minute, truth is truth. But actually lots of people out there don't think that. Whatever you believe, there's a Facebook group full of people who believe the same thing as you, and that's a challenge. Which leads to our fifth challenge, digital flocking. This is a term coined by a US sociologist that I really like. The great thing about digital flocking, even if you've never heard it, you can probably get an idea of what it means. It's the tendency we have to gather together with people like us online. So whatever you are into, there are other people like you, and it's very easy to hang out with your tribe and denigrate others. This was shown very powerfully, actually, during the last presidential election in the USA. There was a piece of work done looking at the way that different political tribes behaved online. And it turned out that Republicans online really only tended to quote and to share articles that supported their candidate, Donald Trump, and ignore others. And then over on the other side, on the Democratic side, the reverse was true. People shared stuff that supported Biden and ignored or denigrated stuff that supported Trump. You had these two tribes. Nobody was listening to each other. People were just shouting at each other. Echo chambers are on the internet, and that's a big challenge. And this is a massive danger online, especially for Christians too. We can end up hanging out just with people like us. And then finally, my sixth challenge, which will come as a surprise, I know, to you as I put this on the PowerPoint, shrillness and a lack of nuance. Now, I know that you're thinking shrillness and lack of nuance online. Andy Bannister, what are you saying? No, joking aside, we don't really need to say this, do we? Just hang out on Twitter for an afternoon. There is lots of shouting online, typing in capital letters. Shrillness, yelling at people. Talking in this tone like that, that's shrill, rather than more gently. So yes, harsh, shouty, angry, that kind of tone. Capital letters on Twitter. And the problem is online, the reason this happens, it's very easy to caricature people. It's very easy to reduce other people to a sound bite rather than listen carefully and just yell at people. There's a fascinating American psychologist called Jonathan Haidt, who I quite like, quite insightful, atheist, but quite sympathetic to religion, actually. And in his book, The Righteous Mind, Jonathan offers a really interesting and helpful metaphor, I think, that can apply to some of this, that we should reflect on when we think about evangelism generally, but certainly online. He offers a metaphor of a rider and an elephant. And he said, we like to think, as human beings, that we are in charge of what we think, that our minds are everything and that our emotions are subdued. But he said, realistically, for most human beings, our emotions and our hunches and our subconscious function like the elephant, and our reasonable minds are like the rider on top. Because if you think about that picture for a moment, the rider likes to think he's in charge of the elephant, and he may have some influence, but that elephant is pretty much going to go wherever it darn well likes. And he says it's the same as human beings. We think that we're being reasonable, and we don't stop and reflect on just how much we are being driven by our emotions, by our feelings, and especially things like social media that play to this. And Jonathan goes on to say, if actually you want to win people over, you need to appeal to the elephant. You need to be more likable. You need to be more winsome, because then the elephant will lean in towards you and in some cases take the rider with them. Meaning, when we're online as Christians, we need to work especially hard to be winsome and kind and gentle and different. And you may indeed win people by your character, as 1 Peter 3 encourages us to. So there are lots of challenges in terms of the digital public square. Some are pretty daunting, but I am not a pessimist. It may sound like that from that list. I'm actually an optimist. Although somebody once pointed out that an optimist believes this is the best of all possible worlds, and a pessimist fears this is in fact the case. But what are the opportunities? There are huge opportunities, I think, online for us too. And the first thing I'd want to say here, by the way, is history is on our side, because Christians have always embraced new technology, especially new communications technology, and we've always managed to use it well for the gospel. So think back right to the very beginning of the early church. Christians adopted the Codex. Until, around the turn of the first century, the scroll was the most common form in which things were written. Very, very cumbersome, hard to use. And around the time the Gospels were being written down, the Codex had been invented, and Christians grabbed hold of this and went, this is brilliant, this is fantastic. The Gospels become more portable. And historians will tell you it was partly the early church that caused this technology to be adopted so quickly. Scrolling on, pardon the pun, through history, 1,500 years later, Christians adopted the printing press. Think of Gutenberg's Bible. And then similarly, telegraph, radio, TV, and the internet. There's been technologies that Christians have grabbed hold of really quickly. Each technology brings challenges, but each brings opportunities too. So I'm encouraged looking backwards that we can do this well. And one opportunity, of course, that the digital world brings straight away is the possibility of engaging with those who don't come to our churches. We've seen this at Solas. We launched a video series about 6 years ago, called Short Answers, where we do little videos about 3 or 4 minutes long, answering common questions about Christianity, very non-Christian friendly. We've clicked through something like 2.5 million engagements on that series. Pretty low budget, it's done on a shoestring, but it's just, we found a niche and been amazed where those things end up. We also saw something interesting that tells me interesting things are going on during COVID. During the early months of the COVID pandemic in the UK, one leading British newspaper, The Guardian, on the left there, very left-wing, very usually hostile to Christians, ran a story announcing that 33% of 18 to 34-year-olds were watching religious content online. Meanwhile, the New Statesman on the right, again, left-leaning political magazine, usually pretty cynical, about religion. They ran a cover story called How Coronavirus is leading to a religious revival, picking up on the same trend. And then we saw things like the comedian Russell, pressed the wrong thing there, the comedian Russell Brand, very popular online. He put a video up called Why the Hell Are People Suddenly Googling Prayer? Within a few days, he got millions of views on this. It had gone viral among young adults, which tells me there's an interest in spiritual stuff, especially among younger audiences, and it's bubbling up in all kinds of places. That encourages me. One of the most surprising examples I saw of this, by the way, was during my PhD, I got involved in the online world of Second Life. That's like a three-dimensional sort of version of the internet in which everything you see there is made and constructed by its users. I actually paid for my doctorate by running a virtual business in Second Life, which makes me really unusual. Not merely am I a Christian with a PhD in Quranic studies, but I paid for it with pixels, but there we are. In Second Life, I remember coming across a pastor, a real-world pastor, who was running a church online in the world of Second Life. And he said to me, so I've done this, he said, because I find hundreds of people come in virtual avatar form to the church who wouldn't come to a real-world church. And they have really genuine spiritual questions. And this has been a space where we can engage people. We couldn't do this kind of stuff without digital. It's really exciting. The digital world also allows, of course, any message to go global. Communicators have this unprecedented opportunity to reach people well beyond our horizons. I saw a really good example of this last year where a friend of mine, who's a pastor in the far north of Scotland, preached a regular Sunday morning sermon to his congregation of about 250. What he didn't know at the time was that had been streamed, he knew that part, but he didn't know that someone who was watching the stream had shared his sermon with a friend, who'd shared it with another friend in Australia, and it eventually been watched by an Australian atheist who came to faith in Christ through watching my friend's sermon. And my friend was staggered when 6 months later he got an email from Australia saying, I just wanted to thank you for that sermon you preached last year. It changed my life. My friend said to me, I just had no idea. I wasn't realizing this was happening. And just astonishing the way that can happen with the digital world. And that's a huge opportunity. And then, of course, the last opportunity, I think, that is really, really incredible is we have this ability with the digital world to directly engage with an audience. You know, people can post comments on stuff you post online. People can respond. They can engage. Now, sometimes what you get is abuse and stupidity, yes. But sometimes you also get the honest seeker, the person who really is trying to engage. And over the years, it's been really exciting to have had the opportunity to engage with people online who've posted a comment on material that we've done at Solas. Let's get very practical. We've talked about some of the theories, we've talked about some of the challenges and opportunities, but let's get very practical. And let's begin by, let me share with you 5 principles of personal evangelism, digital evangelism in the digital public square. Then we'll do some for organizations. And these are just things that I've seen or I've tried or I've kind of learnt the hard way or we've learnt at Solas through experience. So here are the 5 personal principles. First one is remember that the real world is always going to be better for communication. I think I love digital technology. I'm an early adopter. My background was in computer science. I love digital tech. But I think I've also learnt that digital works best when it supports the real world. So if you're a pastor and you've connected with someone in your town digitally, nothing beats saying, hey, can we grab a coffee sometime and chat further? You will achieve far more that way. Likewise, at Solas, for example, whenever we engage with somebody online, and if the conversation is going well, we always look for times to go, hey, you know, would you be open to, if you let us know what town, country you're in, see if we can connect you with a church who can help you with some of the questions that you have. Digital is fantastic, but I think it works better when it supports the real world. When it replaces the real world, I think that's when things go badly wrong. Second, try and extend your tribe, by which I mean it is so tempting online to just hang out with Christians. It's very, very easy to do that. Try not to do that. Think of Paul in Acts 17. When he gets to Athens, the first thing he does, he doesn't just go to the house church or even the synagogue. He goes and checks out the idols and the statues and the temples. He goes and sees what's going on. Do the same online. Find ways to do that. Maybe it's something as simple as joining a Facebook group reflecting an interest of yours that's not necessarily a Christian one. Perhaps if you're into Star Trek or something that I will pray for you afterwards, but you might want to hang out with other sci-fi fans and chat about your favourite show and build relationships, and that gives you a way to share faith. I have friends who do gaming online and have found ways in the kind of conversations they have while online gaming to talk about faith. It look different for each of us. Equally, if you are involved in church leadership, how do we develop social media strategies that get our content in front of non-Christians, not just shared by Christians as well? So how do we extend our tribe? Thirdly, be authentic. Not much to say here, other than that I think people can see through bluster and falsity very easily. So try and be authentic online. One way I mean about this, for example, is if you are a small church, don't try and pretend to be a big church online. I've seen small churches do this and try and get really flashy, and it's like, people can see. Or people are going to turn up on a Sunday expecting something amazing, and it's not. It's 15 of you and a cat or something. Be real, be honest, be genuine. Genuineness works online. And I think we're engaging, particularly with Generation Z and so forth, I think a real desire for authenticity. So try and reflect that online in the content that you do. One way, by the way, we found really effective in that, those short answer videos that I described, we experimented with really highly producing them. And actually we found we got more impact from filming them in a slightly less professional way, keeping the stumbles. So if I stumble, or one of my guest presenters stumbles, not go, oh, let's take that again. Keep the stumbles and the coughs and the things. People responded better. It feels more natural. So don't be authentic. Here's a biggie. Don't be weird. Don't be weird. Now, at the risk of causing gratuitous offense, I think the social media feed of many Christians that I see fall into one of two categories. On the one hand, there are some people who share nothing about faith at all on their social media feeds. They just gum up their social media feeds with pictures of their children or the pet cat doing something amusing, or the latest meme that, quite frankly, everybody else already saw 3 years ago. Anyway, so some people go that way and there's no faith to be seen. Other Christians go the other way, plastering our social media feed with truly naff Christian content. I mean, cheesy stuff galore, or even worse, Christian conspiracy theories. Or even worse, just conspiracy theories. I remember during COVID when there were quite a lot of conspiracy theories, coming across one or two Christian friends who were sharing stuff on, how vaccines are going to turn us all into lizards, how Bill Gates is trying to, give us all tinfoil hats. And then the third thing would be evidence for the resurrection. And I would say to friends, do you not think that when your skeptical friends look at your Facebook feed and they see those two really weird things, they're going to decide that the evidence for the resurrection is the same as the other? So by all means, believe every conspiracy theory you want. But if most people are thinking it's weird, keep it off social media. Keep it to your friends down at the coffee shop. And maybe there's a middle ground. Maybe the middle ground is maintaining a normal social media presence. Show some photos and travel stuff and ordinary stuff that you're doing. But every so often, drop in good quality, thought-provoking Christian content. But just season it, not overdo it. I remember at one event I was speaking at, a woman raised her hand in the Q&A and said, Andy, I'd like your advice. I've been sending a Christian gospel video to my sister who's not a Christian, and I send her one every week. I've been doing this for 2 years. And she's just finally actually asked me to stop. What should I do? So yes, thank you. I just went, stop. Is it literally taken 104 videos before your poor long-suffering sister has gone no more? So just stop. Just take your foot off the throttle and be normal and pray and trust there'll be an opportunity to talk about things. Don't use the fire hose approach to digital evangelism. Fifthly, try sharing content that intrigues people. By which I mean, when a non-Christian friend scrolling through your social media feed or coming across your profile, they are not likely to click on a post entitled 5 Reasons Why Atheism is Stupid, or 10 Reasons Why You Need Jesus Right Now, good as those articles may be. But what about posts that intrigue them? What about stuff that people look at and go, that's interesting? What about posts that start from stuff they're already into and draw them into the gospel? Lots of ministries do this really well, not just at Solas, but because I do work for Solas, some things that I might mention. There's a leaflet about us on the seats, by the way, you can take away and look up the website. We do some things at Solas that plug this gap. We have a series for the last year or so called Have You Ever Wondered? These are videos and blog posts that start from things like beauty, justice, art, film, and try and gently just bridge to spirituality. They're great conversation starters. You'll never get the whole of the gospel in sharing one of these, but you might start a conversation about faith. This year we're running a series called Undercurrents, where we particularly focus on movies and doing this. And so far we've covered everything from Tolkien to westerns to science fiction, because in all the great movie genres there are Christian themes and there are ways of gently starting conversations. I had huge fun because I'm a Tolkien nerd, writing the first one on Lord of the Rings and gently asking questions like, why are we drawn to stories in which good triumphs over evil? Why has Tolkien's story had such longevity? Could it be some of the themes in there? And I wonder where those themes come from. And then I already mentioned kind of short answers. And there are loads of other ministries do this kind of stuff. Find things that intrigue people, that people are like, that's an interesting question. So that's 5 principles for individuals. Let me just give you a few principles very quickly for churches and ministries. Time is against us, and I want some time for Q&A. But again, a lot of these are self-explanatory. Some you'll look at and go, yeah, I've already thought about that. Others maybe you'll look at and go, oh yeah, that's a good idea. So let me run through these. First one, I would recommend, do less better so you can do more well. Do less better so you can do more well. I often come across churches and organizations that are trying to do way too much, I think, in terms of digital content, spreading themselves really, really, really thin, sometimes even like burning their teams out because they're trying to do so much. Think of poor old Diane at the museum in the Sherry Turkle story. What about rather than try and produce, dozens of bits of good digital content, what if you tried to do one a month? Or something that was really effective and really done well and manageable. And if another church or ministry is doing something better, rather than duplicate it, why not just share it? Why not make use of all the great resources out there? The joy of the internet is you can do that and still draw attention to what you're doing in your town and community. Use those in your church with a gift for digital, especially young people, by the way, rather than the pastor trying to become a TikTok star, which nobody wins when that happens. Nobody. It just is not a good look. And what about find those in your churches who are gifted out of this? And what an amazing opportunity to help bring young people into ministry, because often on some of those newer platforms, it's young people. It's the younger ones who understand it. We'll draw them in, use them. And so what a wonderful opportunity to release those with digital gifts and train them for ministry. So use those with a gift. Thirdly, experiment and iterate and adapt. One of the things I love about digital evangelism is you can change things very quickly. If you produce some wonderful new gospel booklet and print 4,000 copies, that's a lot of work. And if you discover actually the first chapter should have been written differently, you've got boxes of the things in the garage and you're stuck. But the internet, you can change things really quickly. I love that. So lean into that, experiment and iterate, try different things. If you've got the time and the resources, try different versions of the same thing, what marketers will call A/B testing. You can do 2 slightly different versions of a video, release them both, see which one has more impact. And if something isn't working, don't be afraid to let it go and move on. And if you stumble across something that is working, lean into it. So digital lets us innovate very quickly, and I think that's wonderful. Fourthly, learn from what others are doing. What are others doing well? And particularly, what can we learn from our secular friends? What are secular organizations who are having a great impact online doing, and how do we do that well? 2 examples right now I think I've really learned a lot from in recent years. I think some of the environmental groups are doing great content in terms of getting people thinking about ecology and stuff. Some of the ways they're communicating we can learn from. And then similarly, a few years ago, I remember really watching the way that the LGBT community online were really changing the narrative, and they were using stories. I'm thinking, we need to learn this as Christians. We need to tell stories better, because we live in a world in which people respond far better to stories. And so, and as Christians, we have great stories, what God has done in people's lives. As evangelicals, we tend to be very fact-based, and that's good. But how can we also tell stories well? So how can we learn from what others are doing and go, yeah, okay, I may not agree with the content of that organization, but what they've done, yeah, we could learn from that. Fifthly, tackle the big questions. By which I mean, look for what are the things that people are talking about. What's going on in culture? Rather than talk about the questions of 2 years ago, which is the church we can sometimes do, figure out what's going on. What's making the headlines? What's trending on social media? Is there a way of engaging with the questions of the day? I threw that slide about ChatGPT up recently. That's a big cultural question. right now. It'd be great if more Christians engaged with that, those kind of questions, because I think we'll get traction. At the same time as you do that, though, avoid the culture wars. Just don't go there. Avoid the culture wars. Don't get sucked into fighting pointless battles. You know, you may think that Donald Trump is a genius. You may think the EU is totally evil, or you may think free speech is the most important thing on the planet, and you may or may not be right. But if you mix those kind of culture war issues with the gospel, then people who disagree with you on the culture war issue are going to ignore the gospel. Now, I'm not saying don't be passionate about politics. Be passionate about politics. Keep it separate from the gospel, and otherwise you can do a terrible damage. Thirdly, be available to those who comment and engage. Really good social media strategy is when someone comments on something you've posted, try and respond. If they've been really negative, you can still say, thank you for your comment. That's interesting that you would think that. If they say nice things, just a little response to go, thanks for that. People love to be appreciated and love to be drawn in. So draw them in to people who comment and engage. Take the opportunity to start conversations. And then penultimately, be generous. By which I mean, if another church or ministry say, hey, I love that video you did, can we use it? Say yes. I think our default position as Christians should always be yes to anyone asking to reuse our content. That's the stance we take at Solas. All we ever ask is if you could put a link back to us, that'd be brilliant. And then be generous with the content you've made. And also, I think God blesses that, because what happens is the piece of content that you've created could end up having a massive impact because you've let others use it. Don't hang on to stuff and be overly protective. And then lastly, we've already touched on this, be story-driven. So those who are against Christianity often use stories to make their case. We need to learn to use stories really, really well. As I say, facts are great. I'm a philosopher. I love facts. But actually stories can be even more powerful. Find ways to tell them well. And of course, one reason stories are so important is that, of course, Jesus was the great storyteller. And if we try and reduce the gospel to a set of bullet points or a meme or whatnot, then we're going to downplay the gospel. We're going to squash the gospel out of shape. So learn to be people who tell stories well. Well, I hope I've given you food for thought this afternoon. We have covered a lot. Let me leave you with a couple of resources. Some resources you might want to take a look at. 3 resources, actually. I said 3 resources. Solas website, I've been banging on about it. Have a look, dive around it, and given what I've just said, anything you see there, feel free to use, download, share, do what you like with. Dan Strange, who's actually here at ELF, I didn't realise that until I bumped into him this morning. Dan's book, Plugged In, is one of the best books I know in terms of helping Christians think about how we engage culture. And it's not just digital culture, culture in general, but it's a phenomenal book. And it's really worth a read. It's showing how we can take almost any cultural product and build bridges to the gospel. Hugely recommend. And then Alone Together. Sherry is not a Christian. She is a secular Jew, very sympathetic to faith. But that is one of the best books I know in terms of tuning ourselves into some of the problems with digital culture. And one of the big takeaways from that book is we can assume that the very young, teens and so forth, get digital technology, they love it, they're au fait with it. You read that book and you realize there's actually a cry for help from people who feel swamped. And I think one of the challenges for us in ministry is how we don't just assume that the young people in our congregations are okay with everything, but we give them a space where we can support them through some of the challenges. And that book is a great resource and some great insights in it.